In this Shadow of the Erdtree video, I'm going to be showing you my Sovereign Spellblade build. This is a build that uses a new Ash of War Carian Sovereignty that a lot of people have been saying is absolutely devastating, and it absolutely is. And in this video, I want to show you how I use it and why it's absolutely fantastic. So first, let's get into the Ash of War before we talk about the weapon selection, because the weapon I selected is based on some of the properties of this weapon skill. And essentially what this weapon skill does is it allows you to charge up a magic sword that slashes forward in a very long distance, and then allows you to follow up with an AoE slash that's horizontal. And this is a very, very similar skill to Carian Grandeur for those familiar with that weapon skill if you ever use that in the base game. And the charge time between these seems to be roughly the same in my testing. Carian Grandeur might be slightly faster, but it's not markedly faster from my testing. Initially, Carian Grandeur does slightly less damage than Carian Sovereignty if you're comparing the first charged up attack. It does slightly less damage than it, but it costs slightly less FP, so if you factor that in, you're essentially getting about the same damage for the same FP spent, but obviously when you're using this, you're trying to get the most damage out of it, so Carian Sovereignty will pull ahead there because it deals more damage, and also Carian Grandeur doesn't allow for the follow-up attack. Additionally, one main difference too is that the stance damage of Carian Grandeur when it's fully charged is 30 stance damage. The stance damage of Carian Sovereignty when fully charged is 48 stance damage. That is markedly higher, and then if you use the follow-up attack, you do another 45 stance damage for a total of a whopping 93 stance damage with that attack chain. So that means the two most important factors when using Carian Sovereignty are the fact that you can follow up for extra damage and that you can deal more stance damage not only with the initial attack, but also tack on that extra stance damage with the follow-up. And so what this weapon skill does is it not only allows you to rip off tons of health off a boss if you can get the charged attack and the follow-up to connect, but it does so much stance damage that all you need to do is hit with an extra couple of attacks or do something like we've done here and hit with Great Blade Phalanx for more stance damage that then allows you to stance break bosses with basically one cast of this if you can get that Great Blade Phalanx to fire off simultaneously, and then you can go in for a critical strike and repeat, or sometimes you just repeat the combo and it just works fantastically. And some other things about this weapon skill before we move on to our weapon selection are that it deals 100% magic damage, so you can boost its damage very easily with things that boost magic damage, like Magic Scorpion Charm, or Magic Shredding Crack Tier, or Terra Magica. All these things can boost the magic damage of this very, very well. Additionally, the magic infusion of this does about 20% more damage than the cold infusion version of this if your stats are optimized for melee damage. And what I mean by that is, if you have the same int values, right? If you have 80 int and you set it to magic and you set it to cold, it really only does about 5% more damage than cold. But if you'll have lower melee damage if you do that. If you spread your stats around with the cold infusion, putting points in strength or dex and in the best possible way to maximize your melee damage, magic will actually outperform it by about 20%. So you can still run cold with slightly less damage and have the cold debuff build up on the enemy, but your melee damage will take a hit in order to do that. But still you can do that if you want for a very minimal amount of loss in the weapon skill itself. And something else worth noting is that when you fully charge this weapon skill, it actually does 2 bursts of damage independently when you attack, and then when you do the follow-up, it will do a 3rd hit of damage. You'll see this on the screen when I'm testing this weapon skill. But something that's worth noting is that when you hit bigger targets, they'll actually be hit by both these bursts of damage, and when you hit smaller targets, they typically won't. So this weapon skill is much more effective against large targets than it is against smaller ones, and you'll see when I hit some of the bigger bosses in this game, they're going to be hit for much more damage than the smaller ones. And lastly, before we get into why I picked the weapon I did, because this kind of segues into that, is that this weapon skill grants you hyper armor, and this is one of the reasons we can get away with light armor for this build and not get interrupted sometimes when using this weapon skill, is that you get hyper armor when charging up the animation of this weapon skill. And the real interesting thing, though, is the hyper armor that you gain is very dependent on the weapon type that you use this on. So, for instance, great swords, curved swords, and heavy thrusting swords have the highest hyper armor, allowing you to tank through, more hits or harder hitting hits and still get this off. Great katanas are just behind that, and then light great swords are way lower than that, and then straight swords, twin blades, katanas, and curved swords are lower. Thrusting swords even lower than that, and daggers even lower than that. What this means is, the long and short of it is, if you're going to use this weapon skill, ideally you would use it on either a greatsword, a curved greatsword, heavy thrusting sword, or even a great katana, is your chances of getting interrupted while being hit while using it are markedly lower if you're using it on that weapon type than any of the other weapons. And so with that being said, I'm using the Claymore for this build for a couple reasons. First, it is a great sword, so we're getting the highest or tied for highest amount of hyper armor we can have when you use this weapon skill. Second, it doesn't matter how much damage or what the attack rating of your weapon is. This weapon skill will deal the same damage at the same infusion and the same stats, no matter if you're using a dagger, a greatsword, a heavy thrusting sword, a curved sword, no matter what weapon type you're using, because the blade itself doesn't actually connect with the target. So if you're using a greatsword and you're using a lower attack rating greatsword than a higher attack rating one, it doesn't matter, and except for regular melee attacks, it's not going to influence the damage of this weapon skill. And if you use a dagger or a greatsword or something like that and compare them, you're still going to get the same damage with the weapon skill. But as I mentioned, the real reason to pick something with, a heavier weapon than a dagger for this is because of the hyper armor it provides. And another reason that I really like the Claymore for this build is because it has a really fantastic R2 and charged R2 attack that allows you to have really good reach with that thrust, and I really like that. You're going to have lower damage than maybe another greatsword like the Iron Greatsword or the Banished Knight's Greatsword, which you could use those if you want, and you'll have more damage on your regular melee attacks. But I really like the range, because what I'm really interested in with my attacks on this build is not so much the damage that each attack outputs in a boss fight, it's more the stance damage. And since the stance damage on the Iron Greatsword or Banished Knight's Greatsword is the same as the Claymore, landing the attack is more important than the damage we deal, because we want to stance break the enemy and then use Carian Sovereignty. That's really what our strategy is. We're not worried about the damage of individual attacks as much. And I've set this to the magic infusion in order to get the highest possible damage on Carian Sovereignty, but also because if you want to spell cast, then having higher intelligence is going to make it so that you can cast these spells more effective. So part of being a Spellblade is casting spells effectively. So if you go the cold route, your stat spread is going to be somewhere between like strength, dexterity, and int, and that doesn't lend itself as well to hybriding spell casting as the magic infusion does. So then in my offhand, I have the Carian Regal Scepter. This has fantastic sorcery skilling at 80, and it doesn't have any negative effects like some other staffs do. And this is going to allow us to cast any magic spells we want with intelligence requirements easily. We can use any intelligence-only requirement spells that there are. So whatever spells you like, you can mix into this. And I would recommend ones that deal magic damage, because that's what we're set up to do. But you could also add in ones that deal fire damage, depending on what boss you're facing, if you know they're weak to fire. And really the only spells that I have for this build are Terra Magica, which is very situational to further boost our magic damage while standing in it. This can benefit your weapon skill and also spells while being cast. The other one is Great Blade Phalanx, which, as I mentioned, is fantastic for this build. And Great Blade Phalanx is really there for the stance damage, and also because you can throw it up ahead of time, and then it can fire off when you get close, and you don't have to be casting it and then trying to get your weapon skill off really quickly. You can cast it ahead of time and then use the weapon skill as necessary. And this spell does about 30 stance damage total. So 30 stance damage plus 93 is 123 stance damage. Most bosses in the DLC have 120 or less stance. So you should be able to stance break just about any boss if you can connect with this and pull off the full charged combo in one go. That's hard to do, admittedly, but still, this is stacking up stance damage on a boss easily, and you can even get melee attacks and stance break that way, and that's what we really have it there for. And I think it really makes it a lot easier to use Carian Sovereignty than it would be without this weapon or this spell. And then the other spell I have here is Great Glintstone Shard, and this is just for ranged attacks to give me a ranged option. There are so many more spells you can use, and because one of the talismans we're using is Godfrey Icon, picking spells that can be charged would be very, very effective for this build. So take a look at some of the spells that you might want to add in here and see if they can be charged or not, because they would fit right in really well. So then for armor, I'm using the Spellblade set, and there are really two reasons for this. First of all, it weighs very light amount. It's not a very heavy armor set, and this allows us to get down to a light equip load very easily so that we can light roll. And I feel like light rolling is very, very important when using Carian Sovereignty. Being able to dodge and position yourself effectively to get in position so that you can start charging this instantly is very, very important. And I would not recommend trying to play this build in a medium armor set that medium rolls. I think it would be vastly more difficult to use, and you could use the wing tier in order to make yourself light roll, but that would take up a valuable slot, in my opinion, in your Flask of Wonders physique, so I don't recommend doing that. And secondly, the Spellblade set also increases the damage of magic weapon skills, and since Carian Sovereignty is a magic damaging weapon skill, each piece increases that by 2%, so you get 8% increased damage. Now, if you want, you could use Roxasha's set in order to gain that same damage increase to just damage in general, but you would be probably in that medium rolling space, which would be difficult in my opinion. But nonetheless, it is still an option. So talismans wise, there's really 3 that I run all the time, and then I swap up the 4th one depending on what I'm doing. So first is Shard of Alexander. This is a no-brainer. It's going to increase the damage of Carian Sovereignty, so we have it there. Then we have Godfrey Icon. This will increase the damage when you charge Carian Sovereignty, and you should be charging it every time you're using it if you can. That way, you get the most damage, most stance damage, and then you can follow up very, very effectively. Thirdly, we're using the Magic Scorpion Charm because we are using magic damaging spells that deal 100% magic damage, because this weapon skill deals 100% weapon damage, and because when we're set to the Magic Infusion, most of our melee damage is magic, not all of it, so we get a lot of effectiveness out of this. However, there is the downside that you will take more damage when using it. So one of the talismans I use in the 4th slot when I'm out exploring the landscape or in a dungeon, something like that, is the Blessed Blue Dew Talisman. This will replenish your FP over time. This is really good. This weapon skill is expensive. You can be casting spells, so this can just make it easier for you to replenish your FP while you're exploring. Another good one for exploration in dungeons, the landscape, is the Crusade Insignia. This will increase your damage when you kill enemies. You already have very high damage in my opinion, so I think Blessed Blue Dew Talisman is better, but if you still want to eke out some more damage, that's a good way to do it. So when you're talking about boss fights, there's 3 that I think work really well. The first is Two-Headed Turtle Talisman for stamina recovery. Carian Sovereignty is a stamina hog. You need a lot of stamina to be able to use it and to pull off the follow-up, and if you don't have enough stamina, then you won't be able to pull off the follow-up attack, which sucks. So having stamina recovery is important. You can use Blade of Mercy because you stance break bosses a lot, and then when you go in for a critical attack, your attack power will go up, and then if you follow with Carian Sovereignty, it will deal even more damage, or your spells after that will do more damage, so that's really good. And then lastly, the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for more physical protection. We already are in light armor, and we have Magic Scorpion Charm reducing our armor protection even more, so this one can help give you some more protection. So when it comes to attributes for this build, at level 172, I have 55 Vigor, 38 Mind, 33 Endurance, 16 Strength, 13 Dexterity, 80 Intelligence, 7 Faith, 9 Arcane. You don't need any Faith or Arcane. Vigor's at 55 because you are going to trade damage with this build. We are in light armor. We have even less protection because of Magic Scorpion Charm. You'll want to get this up to 60 eventually. Mine is at 38 here because you use a lot of FP for this build. Like, you're casting spells, you're using a very expensive weapon skill, and when you're in a boss fight, you don't have to be worried about using red flasks and blue flasks constantly. Endurance is at 33 in order to be able to light roll with the setup that we have, and also stamina is really, really important because, again, Carian Sovereignty is very expensive stamina-wise, and if you don't have a large stamina pool, you're going to find yourself not being able to do that follow-up. Strength and Dexterity are 16 and 13 to meet the minimum requirements for the Claymore. This is another reason that I chose that weapon. It has very low requirements compared to some of the greatswords, saving me a few levels. And then 80 in, obviously, for spell casting for max damage with our weapon skill and for damage with melee attacks. So for Flask of Wondrous Physique, I have the Stone Barbed Crack Tier and Magic Shrouding Crack Tier, but sometimes I'll swap out the Stone Barbed Crack Tier for the Green Burst Crystal Tier for stamina recovery, depending on what fight I'm doing. But generally, Magic Shrouding Crack Tier will always stay in there because you deal lots of magic damage with this build. And Stone Barbed Crack Tier is really there for the stance damage, right? Because this gives you 30% increased stance damage for like 30 seconds. And this can allow you to just stance break a boss really, really quickly if you can pull it off. It makes you have to play really aggressively, which can make you die fast sometimes. So it's not one that I use all the time. But if I know I can stance break a boss quickly, I use this one. And what's really good about this is 93 stance damage, 30% of that is 27 stance damage. So if you add 27 to 93, you get 120 stance damage. That's exactly enough to break a lot of bosses. So if you can just pull off the combo itself, even without Great Blade Phalanx while this is active, you're going to stance break the vast majority of bosses. And then lastly, if you're talking about Great Runes, Radahn's is the one of choice here. It gives you more health, which you need, gives you more stamina, which makes you playing this build easier, and more FP, which makes playing it easier. All those things are excellent for this build. So that wraps up my Sovereign Spellblade build. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It took me a while to figure out exactly how to use this weapon skill. I started out with like a block counter build or using the deflecting hard tier, trying to figure out how to use those and make this build work. But what I kind of really realized was if you're not playing aggressively with this weapon skill, if you cannot figure out how to play with it aggressively, you're kind of wasting it. So I wanted to figure out a very aggressive build where I could showcase the full potential of this weapon skill, and I think I've done it here. As always, if you have questions or other tips about this build, please leave them in the comments below, and I will try and respond to them as soon as I can.